Okie doke. Well, welcome everybody. And the news I've got, and then I'll check to see if anybody's got anything. Speaking of government, the U.S. Department of Energy just set a goal for 700% more community solar by 2025. So just within the next 4 years, they're looking at increasing community solar sevenfold. Not exactly sure how they're going to do that. They didn't seem to be exactly sure how they were going to do that either. It's like they don't have any money for it. They said they're going to give online and free technical advice. So we all know how great technical advice is from the government. So we'll see how that works out. But they did indicate that community solar typically saves the average subscriber 5 to 25% on their utility bill. So that's an interesting statistic to know. SunGauge which is a bank of sorts that focuses on solar, is now offering 0% interest solar financing. They said for I think it was up to $150,000. So it's residential focused and some light commercial. Terms 5 to 25 years, available in 46 states. So if you're looking to get somebody financed, it's worth a check. Don't know what.
Jay, how do they, if they're a bank, they're not a producer, how are they doing that? Is that's like saying I'm making wind turbines, but I'm going to, or solar panels, but I'm going to give them away for free. Yeah. Interest is their money. I mean, it's their,
unless they charge you an upfront fee of some sort, which compensates for the interest, you would think, or unless they've got a deal with some sort of installing company. But the article didn't say anything about that. Are
they government funded?
It didn't state that either. Okay. Just said they're.
There are some businesses that actually give away lost leaders so that they can gain a base.
Yeah, possible. Yeah, although the one thing that made me a little bit cautious in there was it said inclusive of government and local subsidies. And I was thinking, what? Are they taking your subsidy? Are they taking credit? Yeah, are they taking the REX or something? But it was very oddly worded, and it kind of made me think, yeah, I wonder if that's where they're getting it. They're getting it through some sort of subsidy. Well,
are they owned by Sunrun?
It didn't state that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Sure, it has the same model.
It's like GE financing, where GE has a quote unquote independent bank next to it, where they fund all the planes and the boats they make.
Yeah, I don't know. It's worth checking. I mean, it was a very short article, but news was light this week, so I included it. Most all the news was just so-and-so's installing a big system.
Have you seen, Jay, any of I get my uncle across the street asking me all the time. He gets these pop-up ads. We're getting them in the neighborhood around here on the phone or on the computer saying, we'll install it for free. And in fact, the government will now give you $2,000 back in addition to what, I don't know what they're doing, or who, if that's a particular company that's trying to promote that, or.
I get those too. And a lot of times they're saying, homeowners in Ohio now qualify for or whatever.
That's it.
And I just look at them and say, that's a scam. They're just
that's what I figured too, but I wasn't sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know of any exclusive thing other than what we've talked about. They keep saying you may be eligible for, zero. Yes. If you've got one of these, and they point to an electric meter, like nobody,
Yeah. And a roof.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe that's Sunrun. Isn't that the scammer group there, Bob, who are going out there and they're saying, yeah, we'll install zero financing. It'll only cost you $45,000, so they jack up the price and then, claim it's a deal. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's Sunrun. It took a friend of mine that he was the most frugal person in the world. His electric bills were definitely under $35 a month. And they put their system up on his roof and got all of the credits for all of it, and asked him for the honor of $25 extra a month for putting it on there.
Yeah.
And in the state of Illinois, you're still paying a stipend for $17 to $18 a month if you use zero electricity.
Oh, just the connection fee.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think, it just reminds me, my dad used to tell me when I was like a teenager, I think it was the first time some life insurance person tried to sell me life insurance. And he said, life insurance should be purchased. It should not be sold. He's kind of saying, if you want it, go out and buy it, but
Mhm.
don't get it sold to you because you're going to get ripped off. And solar's pretty much the same way. If you want it, go out, get some bids, but don't let some guy show up to your door and say, I got a deal for you. So,
Mhm.
Well, Facebook has lots of solar clubs going on it. And I belong to an Illinois one that has over 600 people on it. And almost every other post is showing the scam that, and one of the biggest ones is that they promise so much output and they're like 70% of what they promised on the output, and asking, how do I get my money back?
yeah, that's one of the problems is any new industry. And that's what this is. You start now getting the cowboys and the aluminum siding salesmen, coming out of the woodwork and promising everything and delivering very little. Then they install it in a real shoddy way. So speaking of that, in California, the state regulatory board issued a thing. I had mentioned this a couple months ago, where California has what they call their C46 license, which is for solar installers. So basically, you pass a test, or if you're certified, like ETA certified or NABCEP certified, you can get the photovoltaic installer license. You just pay the fee to the state. Well, in a sort of a surprise move, this oversight board ruled that no longer would the C46 be valid. You've got to be a general contractor, which basically means you've got to have an electrician's license in order to install solar in the state of California. And it threw up a whole bunch of screams because effectively they were eliminating 80 to 90% of all the solar installers in the state of California with just one ruling. And they had done this in a way that didn't go through their normal review process. They just sort of announced it out of the blue. Well, a judge recently stepped in now and said, wait a second, he's putting a hold for a year on that, saying your process has to go through the public hearing and the review process and all of that. And they figured that's going to take about 13 to 18 months to do that. But I found it curious. They said that most of all of this was pushed by IBEW in the background to basically require that you be essentially a union electrician in order to install solar in the state of California. So that was interesting to see that was overturned. And I guess I was feeling, because back when I was in telecommunications and I ran an association called Bixie, we kept running into that same battle with the IBEW. They would go into various states and say, in order to install communications wire, you have to be a licensed electrician. And as an industry association, we kept saying, do you know anything about communications cabling? Do you have any? Essentially, they were saying the Bell System employees were not allowed to install telecommunications because they're not electricians. And I know we went to a hearing up in Massachusetts one time, and it was really instructive to see how that stuff works, because their technical guy didn't even understand that fiber optics was not electrical, and we were having to explain to them it wasn't electrical, and they were going, really? So, no, it's photonics. It's not. Oh, that's interesting. but they're like, wire is wire. But the hearing was basically, my name's Sean Patrick O'Grady. I represent Union Electrical 747 with 752,000 voting members in your district, Senator. Thank you very much. And then they say, oh, and you guys are from out of state, right? Yeah, okay. I rule in favor of the electricians, because they don't care.
Well, I would rule that the people who make the laws be certified in photovoltaic first and in the electrical before they can make a conscious decision on how it should be done.
Yeah, well, I also think any congressman should have to get a 40 on an intelligence test, on an IQ test. But unfortunately, that doesn't work. So, that was one of the lessons. Speaking of these kind of, we had a beloved congressman down in Florida where we live, and this guy had been in Congress forever. And his name was Mike Bilirakis. And oh man, everywhere you saw bumper stickers, I like Mike, and he had been in there for 40 years or whatever. He came and spoke to our Kiwanis Club one time, and he was literally a certifiable nutcase. He could not put a coherent sentence together. And he was talking about how the Viet Cong were responsible for potholes in our roads. And I was like, this guy is a nut. I mean, this guy is crazy. But oh my God, they loved him. And his secret is his staff did wonders, I mean, we had trouble with a passport. We called his office and they took care of it like in 6 hours. And I was like, I know he's a nut, but I'm going to vote for him if he keeps that staff, because I don't care what he does, So anyway, all right, okay. So
Jay, I was going to ask you, in the same vein with your Irish example in Boston. I don't know if you caught it in the proposed legislation they've got for the electric vehicles coming up. Did you see where you get a bigger rebate if you buy union-made cars?
Oh, no, I didn't see that.
You get like 3 times the size of the credit if it's a union-made car versus just a regular electric vehicle.
Huh. Well,
I do know a couple places.
I do know when I bought my Prius Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid, it did not qualify for the rebate because it uses gasoline, but I did have to pay the higher license tag in the state of Ohio because it has a plug. So I got the worst of both worlds. I got to pay $250 a year for my license tag because Ohio wants to punish people who drive electric, but feds don't want to reward anyone who also has gasoline. So
if you know Jay as much as I do, you find out that his Yiddish and German accent is surprisingly sound Irish.
Okay. See, so I drink heavily and I'm cheap, so all the best. Actually, I have Irish in my blood too. All right. Anybody have anything for the good of the cause this week before I get into, I was going to talk about electric cars actually. Yeah, Bill?
Yeah, in passing, I'm going to go look at a 20-foot container that's got solar and the batteries are kaput. I don't have a load tester. And the only thing I'm going to take is a voltmeter, and I suspect all the battery voltage will be below 10 volts. And there's about 20 very large deep cycle batteries in these containers. There's 17 of them in the Houston area, probably all of which are kaput because they didn't have a maintenance contract for. They probably the users turned on the AC and left it on and depleted the batteries. It's a 16 panel array on the roof. And I don't know. I mean, anybody got any suggestions as to load test other than voltage? Load testers, I think, are generally used for cold cranking amps for starting batteries, not so much deep cycle batteries. Does anybody have any comments on that?
Are these going to be lead acid deep cycle?
Yes.
Okay. You can't just hook up a load to them. Well, of course, if they're dead, they're not going to service a load, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a load bank. I could take that, and I have I think I have an amp meter that I can put in series with it.
Well, I've been in the automotive business and the lead acid batteries there. Lead acid batteries is a chemical reaction. It's not a mechanical reaction.
Right.
And I took a fully charged battery and shorted it dead short together with an amp probe on it. And I couldn't get more than 36 amps to come out of that.
This was an automotive battery?
Yeah.
I thought
Lead
the
acid.
cold cranking amps were.
So it's a chemical reaction and it has its limitations. Whereas a mechanical generator, she'll go right through the ceiling.
Well, I wonder, your multimeter often has an amp reading that you could use, and it services as the load if you've got a good enough quality multimeter, as opposed to the Harbor Freight ones that I use, which would fry right out.
No, I don't think you can measure. Somebody smoked a meter last night in our class. He connected the amp to the 24-volt battery, and the smoke came out.
Yeah, was it a Harbor Freight? So,
Well, it wasn't a fluke. It was yellow, but
okay.
Yeah,
Oftentimes, they have two separate amp readings, at least the meters I use. One is for very low levels of amps. The other is for higher
Right.
amps. But yeah, I wouldn't trust one of those little cheapy multimeters because the wires just aren't heavy enough gauge.
Yeah.
So,
The Sun Electric battery tester used a carbon pile and they actually squeezed it to change the resistance of it. And I cannot imagine how to check a battery without some sort of load on it.
Well, let me ask this. I actually do have a load tester and I hooked it up to a battery yesterday and it didn't work. And I was wondering, and it does have one of those piles in it. And I was wondering if there's, it's been sitting for several years. I was wondering what maintenance might be for that, how it can go wrong. There was a small circuit board also, and it could well be that the circuit board has gone bad, but I was wondering whether moisture or something might affect the function of the pile of things.
How old is it?
I'm gonna say 10 years. Chinese made.
Yeah, I would say the battery, the PC board on it, that load wouldn't be taken out, but the PC board would be in question on that. I hope one of your students didn't use it. Because
No.
Is it yellow? Is it yellow?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
It wasn't
yellow.
before they used it. Before they used it,
I was a little bit surprised because he should have known better.
Yeah.
To connect an amp meter to 24 volts. and the meter smelled badly.
Yeah. Well, speaking of your class there, Bill, I want to remind you, I want to do an interview with you for our radio show / podcast about that.
Okay, me and Abe, and I did send you my contact information via text, assuming your phone number is correct.
Which
Shall
one
I
are you
check?
using?
Let me look.
Pause the recording, Jay. You're going to give your phone number to the world.
No, I'll give. The cell number is 740-252-6038.
Okay, I was using the one that says 4300 on the left.
Yeah, that's actually our home landline.
Okay.
So
Can you tell me that number again or post it in chat?
Yeah, it's 740-252-6038.
Yes, we will. Gabe and I'll chime in sometime with you on that.
Okay, so all of YouTube now knows my phone number. So yeah, we'll see. Why not?
And the Chinese.
Yeah, and the Chinese. Well, and
they probably already knew it.
Yeah, Yeah, my life's not interesting enough to be spied upon. All right, anything else before I jump into battery chargers, electric vehicle charging stations? I thought as the focus this time. Bob, you have something?
Yes, I have a customer who wants, with a solar array, a battery backup on it.
Uh-huh.
And my way of thinking is that right now a natural gas generator is a lot cheaper than putting in a battery system, and the payback on that thing must be way out there. But he wants it, and that's a matter of fact, and I can't argue with that. So I guess I'm going to be putting a battery system into a system. And do I have to read your book again?
Well, what kind of system is it? Is it is it an existing system, or are you putting one in?
It's an existing system. It's an input of 11.8 kilowatts, and output of about 9.7 kilowatts. A big system, but doesn't the batteries have to be outside? Doesn't it have to be heated?
Well, as of next year, but so if you do it now, you're not going to be you'll be compliant with the code that exists at the moment. So you can put them inside right now. Just as of the 2023 code, we anticipate they'll be outside.
But didn't I see batteries that were hung on outside walls?
Oh, yeah. You see that all the time. Although typically those are faked anyway, because no battery bank is going to hang up on a wall. Because like those Tesla Powerwalls that they show just hooking up onto, a couple of Molly bolts, those things weigh 275 pounds. So I'd like to see somebody lift that up and hook it on a wall. They usually sit on the ground, they're because of the weight.
Jay, I've got 2 on the wall. Actually, got 4 on the wall.
Did you reinforce your wall?
Actually, in the basement, since it was a stone basement, I put in a 2x4 false wall behind that. The other ones out at my uncle's farm, we do have it on the wall, both of them. They're not the Teslas, but they're the Alt-E batteries. I forget what their name is.
Yeah, so you're just putting a bank. Do they physically rest? Is the base of it supported on the ground though?
No.
Really?
Completely, just like an inverter.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of weight to put on your wall. Normally, you're going to get a case of some sort, like a bookshelf, just one of those rolling things, and just slide them in. And that they make those kind of units for these. And Tesla actually now makes little stands, that are designed to sit on a concrete floor, and the unit just sits in there, whether it's outside or inside. Okay. California, they usually put them outside. But part of the reason for that is because the DC disconnect that has to be there for the firefighters for rapid shutdown, if the case is right there, your disconnect's going to be right there too. So you can turn off the batteries. But if you've got them inside, now you got to create a remote DC disconnect, basically, so that the first responders, when they come, they turn off your PV system. Well, now you're transferring over to a battery-based system.
Battery, yeah.
Now they got to turn off the DC as well, because they don't want any power in the house while they're there.
Right.
So
wouldn't that be an AC disconnect, because batteries normally have an inverter in them?
Yeah, but what they want is, normally if you don't have battery backup, you turn off the AC disconnect, you've disconnected from the system and it shuts off at the inverter. But if you've got a battery backup with a transfer switch, it's now isolated that system, and now you have electricity flowing to critical loads within your home. They want you to be able to disconnect between the battery and that inverter, that secondary inverter, to make sure that there is no AC power or even DC power flowing in the building. So now you've got to have a secondary remote disconnect switch to basically isolate your batteries. But that's only in the case of a first responder or a utility coming to your facility. It's a manual shutoff. So they're just trying to keep everybody safe, in theory. which is a reason why all that stuff being right out there is helpful. But then I think you've got security issues and environmental issues and all that other stuff that's going to get in the way. In the world of today, you got stink bug issues and those Asian beetle issues, you know. I had a thing where my disconnect wasn't working. I opened it up and it was just completely packed with those little ladybug looking beetle things, so that you could no longer turn off, you know, because the bodies of these bugs were just being crushed in the blades, and it wasn't making electrical connection. So, or you couldn't turn the thing back on. So anyway, all right, let's talk about electric car charging. I think some of you guys have various levels of knowledge about electric car charging. At the very basic, there are 3 levels of electric car charging, and this is going to be a bigger issue. In fact, I see Eric Keishan here, but we had a guy in that class that is trying to develop a business plan. Tony, you remember Tony there, Eric, but he's trying to do a business plan of a level of fast charging, sort of mid-range charging station. He sees that there's a market because essentially when you get to level 3, these are talking about 50 to 100 kilowatt systems. But he's saying there's a niche somewhere between the level 2, which is 7.7 kilowatts, and the level 3, which starts at 50. So for moderately sized businesses, there's probably a fast charging somewhere between those that would be a market niche. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm not very familiar with the whole charging thing, but I remember reading about, because you know I'm also interested in fuel cells, and I remember that was like the big use case for the fuel cell in warehouses, is that those forklifts take so long to charge. It's like 8 hours to charge, but you can go and put hydrogen in, you know, like you're filling up a gas in your car, and it's up and running. So how long does it take those charges normally, like if you're Whole Foods or something?
Yeah, well, the level 1, I'll get that. Basically, level 1 plugs into a regular household outlet, 120 volt, operates at 15 amps, you know, a typical 120, 15 amp circuit. Those generate about 1.4 kW, 1400 watts. And it will charge the equivalent of 3 to 5 miles per hour. So the example they gave is a 2021 Mustang has an 88 kilowatt hour battery bank, the electric vehicle. So it would take 63 hours of charging to recharge that battery under that scenario. Then there's the 240 outlets, which are referred to as level 2 chargers. And these typically operate at about 7.7 kW. So if you were to plug that in, it would take about 11 and a half hours to charge at 240 volts. So that's the level 2. That's typically going to be a 240, 40 amp circuit. Now I've seen some that go to 60 amp, but kind of the equivalent of a dryer, you know, or an electric stove in your house as an appliance. It's quite a bit less. Obviously, 11 hours is better than 63 hours, but 11 hours is still a good long time. And if you're running forklifts, 3 shifts, whatever, that's probably not acceptable. Then you go to a level 3, which is a high voltage DC charging process. And these are the charging stations that you'll see at gas stations. And they typically run somewhere between 50 and 350 kilowatts of charging. So they're very, very heavy duty. They also cost like $100,000 to install these little units. So it's not something you're going to do in your home usually. They will take equivalent of about 20 to 30 minutes to charge that same vehicle. So very, very rapid charging. Now, most hybrid vehicles, like my Toyota Prime, Prius Prime, do not have the ability to use a level 3 charging station. It just simply is not there and not needed really for the capacity of that battery bank. My battery bank only has a 35-mile range, without the gas engine. So even with the level 1, it only takes about 6 hours to recharge. So a level 2 would take about an hour, I'm sure. So we've got the plug-in hybrid for the level 3. The plug-ins simply just don't have that as a capacity. But with a lot of the regular electric vehicles, they actually require 2 plug-in ports. One is for the level 1 or level 2, and then the other one is for the level 3 fast charging. So when you open up, whether it's 2 doors or 1 single door, there are going to be 2 ports that you could plug in either or. The lower volume one and level 1 and level 2 use what's referred to as a J1772 jack. And this was developed by or set in motion by the California Vehicle Standards Board, I think it was back in the early 2000s, when they were pushing for electric vehicles. They wanted a universal plug, which makes sense. So every vehicle sold in the United States, every electric vehicle, complies with the J1772 plug for level 1 and level 2, the 120 and the 240. Then right around 2010, a group primarily of Japanese vehicle producers identified what they referred to as the CHAdeMO, which stands for Charge de Move, which is weird. Charge the move or charge on the go. And that was for high voltage DC charging. So that's the little CHAdeMO, but it's a bigger port, it's a bigger thing. So a lot of the vehicles, like you buy a Nissan Leaf or something like that, it's going to have 2 holes. One's for the lower charge rate. The other one is when you plug into one of those commercial things. But standards being standards, of course, Tesla decided they didn't like that. They didn't like that charging port. So they came up with their own Tesla charging port. They developed it to where you don't need 2 different ports. The same port will work with level 1, level 2, level 3. But the European car dealers decided they'd come up with a 3rd charging configuration. They call it the Combined Charging System, or CCS. And the CCS basically takes their level 1 and level 2 charging ports and adds a couple of little nodules to it. And now you can use the same one, but it's different than Tesla because Tesla's was proprietary. So that becomes like a Macintosh or a Apple versus PC kind of thing. They do the same thing, but they do them differently. Tesla didn't seem to care because they're like, hey, we're the only real electric vehicle company out there anyway. So, and they created their own charging network, and theirs is actually set up in a way that if you own a Tesla, you just walk up and plug in and their onboard systems do the billing, depending through the Tesla network. So there's no credit cards required, there's nothing. Whereas everybody else has their own little systems where, you got to use a credit card or you got to do whatever you're going to do. Which is a downside. Now, VW recently invested huge amounts into the CCS charging stations. So now they're becoming competitive with the Tesla as far as availability. And apparently in the US, most charging stations, the high voltage DC charging stations, essentially have 2 wands on them. One is for the CHAdeMO and the other is for CCS. So if you pull up to one, you can use either or. If you've got the cars that use the CCS are Audi, BMW, Daimler, Ford, GM, Hyundai, Porsche, Volvo, and Volkswagen. Those are the ones who use CCS. The ones that use Shadamo are all the Japanese manufacturers, Toyota, Nissan, Honda, the French manufacturers, because of course it's got a name that sounds sort of French, I guess, Peugeot, Citroen. Subaru, is Subaru Japanese? Is it? Okay. And all the Chinese and Indian vehicle manufacturers, which is going to be a big deal, you know, in the future. I think we're going to see that, you know, things shift from Japan and US and Europe into China. They're going to focus on automobile, certainly electric vehicles for sure. So
as long as they keep electricity to their factories.
Yeah, well, they've got some serious problems. Everybody's got serious problems. Yeah, I think that's going to be an issue definitely for them. You can't continually underwrite industries and hope to make a profit. You know, it's sort of that loss leader. You know, we're losing money on every single sale, but we'll make it up in volume. You know, that's the old business way. Let's see. Yeah, anything. I thought this would be worthwhile going over because when I was looking at the charging thing, and I have an electric vehicle or a hybrid plug-in, and it made no sense to me either, even though I charge this thing every single day, because they're always talking about the various charging, the Shadamo, CCS, and Tesla, but that really only applies to the level 3 fast charging. At the level 1 and 2, which is 90% of the time you're going to charge that way, it's all a standard J1772. So that's good news anyway. Although the European version of the J1772 is slightly different than the American version, of course, but apparently they will work in either. So it's just how they work internally with the circuitry. And I think they said that the European J1772 allows for different voltages and 3-phase versus single phase. So it has an onboard charging system that takes the 2 extra wires that they've incorporated. So most of these vehicles, Tesla has passive adapters that you can put on their charger that will convert it over to be used with the Shadamo charging unit. So for $400, you can buy a little thing that clips on the end of your Tesla charging port. And then if you go to a Shadamo charging DC station, you can plug in. So why it costs $400, I'm not sure. Any questions about fast charging or charging stations per se in the wonderful world? Yeah, Bill?
Might add that I have a number of batteries here, and I had a goal of being able to give myself one charge from the batteries through a 120 volt inverter. And one time I actually went over to a friend's house, and the ground connection on a level 1 charger was not connected, and my Nissan Leaf would not take a charge. You need a ground, right? So I don't remember exactly what I did, but when I use an inverter, 120 volt, I think it was 3,500 watt inverter, I had to trick. I think I had to connect ground and neutral in the adapter in order to trick the Nissan Leaf to saying it's okay.
Oh.
And that would have been the same solution at this friend's house, namely hook a wire between ground and neutral. But just in passing, you know, they've got these built-in, you know, safety guards, if you will.
So what you were doing was effectively what happens in the service panel, in the main service panel, where your ground and your neutral are tied together. So
yes.
Speaking of that, and this is sort of an aside, maybe you guys know who are wise in the world of electricity. I was trying to replace, my brother has a hot tub, and when he plugs in the heater for his hot tub, it kept blowing the GFCI outlet, you know, popping the circuit every time he would start the load. And then every time he plugged anything into it, that GFCI would blow. So I just replaced the GFCI with the new one, and everything except the heater would run. And as soon as we plugged the heater in, it would blow. And it wasn't an amp issue. But I wonder if it's a case where that particular outlet is not properly connected to ground. Would that then pop the GFCI outlet? Because isn't there some sort of reference to ground that's required for those GFCIs?
Jay, I'm going to send you a YouTube thing on why not to hook up your neutral to earth ground. We talked about ground loops in the past.
Yeah.
And this guy showed with the multimeter what kind of phantom electricities you can throw on casings all over. He took, I'll send you it, but it's not.
I think I may have seen that one. Yeah, it's interesting. He can even like puts a probe on a piece of ductwork on his furnace or something and gets voltage. Most of that has to do with sub panels, though. You know, you're never supposed to connect your ground to your neutral anywhere except in the main distribution panel. There's only one point of connection where that's supposed to take place. Everything else has to be separated. So
I think you're right. That's what I remember that.
yeah, and in this example, I think in that video, he was showing his main is actually out at the meter. So everything from that point forward had to be separated. Otherwise, you're going to get some issues. So that's something to think about in residential even, because at my home, my main is out by my meter as well, even though there's just one point of connection. So, the other thing I was going to raise about the charging stations is CHAdeMO is the only protocol where they've worked out the vehicle to grid standard. So they call it V2X, vehicle to anything kind of thing. So the CHAdeMO is already been approved as of 2019 for vehicle to grid. And it made me start to wonder, I wonder if it must be a high-speed DC connection in order to do V2G or V2 home, because otherwise now you're going, DC to whatever that inverter is. I don't know. And I don't know that they're worrying about V2G for anything other than high-speed connection. And would that even be helpful to the utility if the lower volume connection was connected to the home or to the grid? So that's worth some further study. Yeah, Bill?
Oh, look, the grid only takes 240 volts AC. So are you saying built into the charge station, it receives pack voltage DC and converts it back to grid compliant AC?
It would have to. I mean, it's just reversing it through that process, but yeah. So my assumption always before is it made no difference between, the V2G, whether it was DC, charging or AC charging. It's got to take the DC from the battery and convert it to grid compatible voltage and signal. But there was no mention of any kind of V2G for the J1772, which is all of the level 1 and level 2s. So maybe I'll do some more research, but all of this stuff is really sparse, even out on the internet. In even preparing for this little talk here, I read through a number of articles, and first off, they're incomprehensible. They're written by people who, I guess, assume you know more or less than what you're trying to understand. So, but the protocols for the V2G is all very theoretical at the moment. Nothing really practical out there. But it's got to become practical. It's got to be a game changer. You know, I mean, this is going to be huge. How we get there, I don't know. Somebody's like a Tesla is going to come up with some proprietary system where we don't have to worry about it, you know. But maybe it'll be Tony from our class. If you start hearing about, what is it, Czar Electronics or Czar Industries or whatever. So
I think it's Czar Power.
Czar Power, yeah. Which stood for, what was, carbon zero, right? Carbon zero something. So, all right. I'm going to maybe get him to come on one of these sessions and talk about what they're trying to do. That would be interesting just to see. You guys can shoot holes in it or let him know.
So Jay, I don't know if this is the form or not, but you mentioned that there was some money available. I think it's like REAP funds for small businesses.
Yeah, for installing solar.
Yeah, how would I find out more about that?
I can send you a link, but it's basically through the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it's designed for businesses in rural areas or focused on agriculture. So if you're in a city with less than 50,000 people, you're considered a rural area. If you're sitting up there in Cleveland, you're not rural. So move your headquarters out to Cuyahoga Falls or someplace, I don't know.
Okay.
But, or if you sell agricultural products, you know, whatever that is, I think they're pretty broad brush on that. So is that something that's outside of you don't do that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
So, I mean, I kind of have two things. So I'm a landlord, you know, and I was just kind of thinking, hearing you say anybody that owns property should have panels, you know. Yeah. And I'm thinking, well, if the money was available to you know, to accelerate the return on the investment, I certainly would do it, like on all my properties. So I just need to find out ways to get that money, you know.
Yeah, well, one thing to look at, of course, as a business, if this is part of your business, you can take accelerated depreciation, which might be helpful for a portion of it. But you may also, in Cleveland, I know that they've got some PACE programs. And where you might want to look at that is say, okay, can I finance this through and then pay for it on my property taxes? You know, which then essentially means no upfront cost, and the savings is spread out over 20 years. If you're paying the utilities on your property, you're probably going to come out ahead by having solar and not having to pay the electrical.
What about the idea, or is that just still far in the future of like the virtual electric utility? So
yeah, well, that's a bit in the future as far as essentially buying electricity through someone other than your local provider. Whether that's,
because isn't that very similar to the telecom world, how it used to be, you know, that you route through the network and you pay the network fees, and, you know, things like that.
Yeah, however it ends up being, but basically it's saying that these telephone lines or these power lines are not necessarily solely owned by your local utility. They have to lease out space to their competitors because they've been given these right-of-ways, you know, as a public utility. So, but that's not going to solve your problem getting solar on your home. It may lower your cost through competition. But, you know, that, or community solar is an option for you as well, if it's available through your utility, where you don't have to put the solar on your home, but you can buy into a larger network, a larger array owned by somebody else, and then allocating its production to your apartment. So,
yeah, that's kind of anti my thinking. I'm all for the distributed power, you know.
No, I'm with you. I'm similar. You've got all of the other issues of dependency upon a central authority. You know, it's basically another it's basically a utility getting its power from somewhere else, you know, other than a coal power plant. Although, you know, a bit of a co-op nature to it. But my experience with co-ops haven't been all that great either. You know, I think they tend to make their profit through assessed fees and things of that nature. So, and you're dependent on the quality of management.
I was just thinking if there was a way for me to sell, excess power at higher than wholesale, that would be better,
Yeah, well, if you're in a net metered environment with a publicly owned or an investor owned utility, Ohio law today sets it usually at a retail rate, up to your level of consumption. Okay. It's only when you start to exceed your consumption. Yeah.
Jay, does that apply to businesses too? I'm just curious, or is that just for individuals?
I don't know. I think it does, but I'm not sure. It's probably because you have different rate schedules and different.
I don't know either. A lot of the stuff that is usually a lot of the businesses have different, as you said, even in the book, you have a capacity, they go through the month and what's the highest capacity, and then they set your rates on that.
Yeah, you get demand charge and things like that.
Yeah. So, I mean, what you were talking about the other day with the demand charging, like if you could offer a service to kind of, cut the tops off, and keep them below that, double your price, double your rate, amount. I think that would be a great business to offer businesses as well,
Yeah, and that's a job, or that's a business that really is basically installing batteries. Or some sort of storage device, or I guess it doesn't have to be a battery. If you could have a secondary power source of any sort designed to instantaneously come on when demand load is high, just to level demand. So that would be an interesting thing to think about. If you've got multiple suppliers for servicing a business, one of those suppliers could simply set up their business model to lower demand load. We'll be a secondary supplier who only services your needs as demand spikes to level your demand.
Doesn't that, that's kind of like a similar pattern for the electric utility, right? Like those hydropowers, it's not very cheap, but when the prices are really high, they fire up those extra, plants, right, for generation,
Yeah, that would be an interesting business model. Of course, as soon as you set up that business model, these utilities have probably changed their pricing structure, and anytime something is designed just simply to address a weirdness in the pricing models, it's kind of tenuous,
So can I throw out an idea? So it kind of seems like to me like the power company just kind of says, power's out, we're working on it, get it as soon as possible. But that just doesn't seem acceptable to me.
Yeah.
I mean, much the same way that you can get a DVR, recorder from your cable company or modem or router, why couldn't they offer like a battery backup solution, that you pay a subscription for, and that will kind of help with, reputation risk, as well as make your customers happy, as well as, give more power in the network that you can go and smooth out. You don't have to go and buy at high rates from other areas. It just seems like it would be something that would be useful for the utility as well.
You would think that they would, but I think you're dealing with monopolistic mindset where, you got to buy from us whether you're happy or not. So why don't I just do the minimum? That's kind of their perspective. But I think you're going to see that these utilities will fall by the wayside or become less relevant because they have that attitude. Other people will step in with services that customers need because of the unreliable service of the utility. Yeah, Bob, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just renewed my ETA, and they had a requirement of 10 credits. So I have to be more knowledgeable than I was. Would you believe it was 2 years ago I left your class? Anyway, I have to tell you that your sessions here, I always walk away more knowledgeable. It is a good educational tool. Can't I get any credits from you?
I guess I could check with ETA. It never occurred to me we could, of course, the issue there is that I have to issue a certificate, of completion. So I'd hate to, issue a certificate of completion for each of these, weekend or Solar Noon Tuesday sessions.
Can you bundle them over the month or quarter?
Yeah, I'll check with Brian at ETA just to see, but yeah, I mean, vendor training is applicable. I can see attendance for something like this, so we'll see if we can't facilitate it.
And if you need money to sponsor that, I know a good loan company that gives free money away.
Yeah, zero financing for all solar, right?
And if you act immediately, they may throw in a free lunch.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else before we call it a day? I see you, Nathaniel. You finally made it, but you came right at the end. Right at the end.
Oh,
you got to get on. You got to get on Eastern time instead of Central time. So.
Okay. Thank you.
So, all right. Anybody else have any comments before we cut out?
I posted a link there for a circuit breaker that is a GFI. Young kid, he's pretty sharp. He does these YouTubes, so that might be something to look at with your hot tub issue.
Oh, just set the whole circuit breaker as a GFCI?
Well, it is a special kind of circuit breaker. But,
yeah, well, at least we'd know that the grounding would be okay there. So,
okay.
All right. Okay, thanks a lot, Bruce. Take care, everybody.
Okay,
see you next Tuesday at noon, Nathaniel, at noon.
Yeah, I will be there.
Okay, take care.